Welcome back to the live coverage of
AWS on air.
AWS On Air at AWS Remars. I'm A.M. Grabelny. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Brian. I'm a solution architect here at AWS, one of your hosts for this show. I'm so excited about this next topic we're going to be talking about, Brian.
I am super excited about this. I am really excited about this. I had a chance to read up on it a little bit yesterday, and yeah, I'm super excited to talk about it.
Tell the people who you are, too.
My name is Brian Terry. I'm a senior developer advocate on the CloudFormation team, and if this is your first time joining us, welcome.
Now, we're about to talk about something that was just announced, right? We've got two friends down here. Please introduce yourselves to our audience as well.
Sure. Hey, this is Atul Dev here. I'm a director in the machine learning team at AWS.
Awesome.
Hey, this is Ankur Desai. I am a principal product manager with the AWS AI services team.
Awesome. Awesome. So, I mean, this product that we're going to talk about today, I'm super excited about it. I mean, anytime you talk about like AI combining with coding, you've got my full attention with that. So I guess the first thing that we need to talk about is like, what is this new feature? What is this new product that we released?
So CodeWhisperer is a machine learning powered coding companion. Essentially, it allows developers to get personalized code recommendations in their IDE as they're writing their code.
Wow, that is super cool. So you're literally saying you can get almost like code completion with AI inside of it.
Well, I mean, code completion as such has existed historically for a while now, right? I mean, but the big difference between CodeWhisperer and some of those tools is that in the past, you would get a word or two. Basically, if I could get parameters of a function, or I could get properties of an object, or little small recommendations. But with CodeWhisperer, you actually get long recommendations that are accurate and tailor-made for the specific thing that the developer is actually trying to do.
Wow. So
yeah, I've worked with code completion for a long time. I'm a .NET dev, so Visual Studio has had IntelliSense for a long time. But it's just like you were describing, right?
Yeah.
I have an object, declare it in some, C# folder somewhere. IntelliSense can detect that object. It'll I'll put a dot. All the properties on that object get listed out. But that's not actually necessarily really coding for me.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So how does CodeWhisperer code for me?
Right. So there are two ways in which CodeWhisperer actually gives recommendations. One is you're typing code, it understands, it looks at all the code that you've written so far, and it basically suggests like blurbs or basically several lines of code that as you're typing. The other way is, hey, I'm just writing a comment. Write a function to get, say, convert a JSON file into a CSV file. If I just write that comment, I hit enter, and I basically get a blurb of code that was created just based on that comment. Now that's the difference between that code generation and traditional code complete.
Oh, super interesting. I play around a little bit with ML, and a little bit. I'm no expert. But when I used it, I noticed that the more I use it, the better it gets at these recommendations. So does this work with this solution too? The more I use this, the better recommendations I get with coding?
So what has happened in the last few years is that machine learning technology has really evolved. Of course, the usage and feedback of all that is great. But in the last few years, there is a concept of large models that has evolved. In the past, models used to be millions of parameters. Now we're talking about billions and hundreds of billions of parameters. And these models basically take a lot of understanding of the training data, understand relationships between all the different things that have gone into the training data. And then based on that, they can actually kind of predict what's coming next. And the interesting thing to note here is the prediction is not happening all at once. It generates this token one by one. Token is basically a small part of a code. It generates that one by one, and it uses that preceding context along with the new one to generate the next line of, or next part of the code. So your code is getting constructed behind the scenes a little bit by little bit. Sorry, I got into the details of the thing, not exactly talking about your kind of question, but this thing is so fascinating. I just kind of wanted to focus on that part first.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Yeah. Please
that's what we're here to hear about. Again, I've been working in many IDEs over the years, many different languages. I've had code snippets. I've had things like that. generation of code for me is very interesting, but it also makes me think, like, is this going to get in my way in any way? As a developer, like, am I in charge of the code, or is the code in charge of me? Which
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of okay with the code being in charge of me, you know? Some of these things, I came from an era where, you know, I'd have to go look up stuff in the standard dictionary in a book, right? Like, if I forgot a method or something.
I mean, the analogy that I mean, this is just informal analogy, right? I mean, when the calculators first came in, they were a tool for mathematicians.
Right.
You know? Mathematicians existed. When computers came, Excel came, mathematicians still exist.
Don't take away my abacus, okay? I need that abacus.
Yeah. So essentially, I mean, this tool it's a tool for developers. The developer is still the expert. The system is not the expert.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy, right? Like the calculator doesn't make the math any less real, right? Like it just shortcuts you to value.
Exactly.
Right? You don't necessarily. There's no value in a programmer, you know, just having these different things memorized and just spitting them out, right?
Yeah.
Really, as a developer, I'll be honest too. The higher I got in terms of seniority on a dev team, the less actual coding I was doing, right? Like, I could see this as a very useful tool too in like code reviews.
Yeah.
Do you all see some applications there as well?
So code review is actually being tackled by a separate service. So we have Code Guru, which does code review. It also does analysis of your code to identify the most expensive lines of code. Actually, that's a great point. You know, we embarked on this journey of using machine learning to improve the life of a developer back in 2019 when we launched Code Guru. So this is for us, this is a continuation of that journey where we started with code reviews. We started with analysis of the code to identify kind of, you know, runtime kind of analysis to detect, hey, is this code not efficient? Is it creating more kind of usage, more kind of wasted compute, stuff like that. And then basically we have now code generation. So this is an extension of that journey.
Very cool. That's very cool.
By the way, one of the things I want to highlight, right? You mentioned earlier, like, hey, how does this replace the developer? While I'm writing code, the interesting thing is the recommendations pop. You can cycle through multiple recommendations in the IDE, or you can just ignore all of them and say, hey, none of these recommendations are actually relevant. I'm just going to keep typing. So if you do that, it is just a thing that pops up. You can, and also if you don't like the auto recommendations part, you have manual triggers. You can basically say, I don't want this popping all the time. I can just invoke CodeWhisperer to give me recommendations now.
Oh, so we were talking in an earlier session about developer flow, like this idea of developer flow, very important to some devs. I'm not one of these dev flow people. Like I can context switch, but I'm not writing at this point in my career like deep production code. But that is like so vitally important to some devs that anything that is distracting, like I don't want it once I get in this flow. It's cool that you've put in that option of like, no, I only want to call upon this.
Although I personally, I mean, you mentioned .NET, so now I'm going to talk about my .NET days.
I'm not talking
so
about
I used to write code in C# and you know, VB.NET back in the day. And for me, like, I mean, I used to always wonder how I ever coded without constantly going to Google search, kind of figuring out a right snippet, then taking it back, customizing it for my thing, and then sometimes what I found in the web was not in the same programming language. And I'm like, oh my God, now I had to like look at the syntax and make sure that this code is the correct syntax. With CodeWhisperer, you don't have to do all that. So I feel honestly, if I were writing code today, I would be totally okay with the recommendations popping because anyway, my alternative was to go to some web search, and honestly, when you know what happens when you go to web search, you're not just doing that, you're going several other things, and then you're distracted.
You mean you don't get the answer immediately? Like the first try? No, yeah, exactly. It's like,
what's going on Hacker News? Or, I mean, you know, there's too many distractions once I'm on the browser.
Great, I found this article from like 2010 that is covering, you know, like some framework that's way out of date. Let's see if I can convert that to maybe today's one. Nope, I can't. I still have to keep searching. This sounds familiar. Totally. I mean, it's interesting. Where do you see the place with things like Code Guru and CodeWhisperer, you know, in terms of building with AWS? You know, where do everything slot in? What type of developer workflow are you all looking to build out there?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to actually make sure that we make building applications on AWS easier for people, right? And we have made a conscious effort in that regard. We have made sure the model that powers CodeWhisperer is actually trained on AWS-specific code as well, right? So in fact, that's actually a good segue into our demo. Maybe we can show how we can quickly generate a function to upload a file to S3 and how it can really make a developer's life easy, because now they don't have to go to AWS documentation all the time, right? You can actually.
I'm super excited to see this.
All right, so let's try this, right? What is happening is this is JetBrains IDE Pycharm. We have the AWS Toolkit extension installed.
Okay.
And then CodeWhisperer is a part of it, right? So right now it's in the preview. What we'll do is the auto completions are on.
Is there
So
a
as we-
requirement to have the developer tools installed on your IDE?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It is delivered via the AWS Toolkits plugin,
Okay.
which is it actually has other AWS services integrated as well.
Got it.
So let's start writing a simple comment. Let's say function to upload a file to an S3 bucket, right? Now, as
So
I
it's
hit,
just natural language, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It is natural language, and it is, you don't actually have to do anything special, right? The way you write comments, you can just continue doing that.
Wow.
So what it has done is it has actually created the function signature for me, right? The signature looks good. This is what I want to do. Now I'm just going to hit the tab key. Now it becomes a part of my code. I'm going to hit enter again. And now it should actually generate the entire function for me, right? Now it knows that this is the comment and this is the signature. And it is also giving me, the code with the doc strings in there. It has exception handling, so the best practices are also there. So this is where, imagine a developer doing this. There is no value in memorizing this thing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Ideally, what you would do, you would go to the documentation and you take the code from there, and then you would change it to your needs. Here, if I hit tab, this is a part of my code now, right? This saved me probably 10, 15 minutes of spending time with documentation.
Wow. This is super interesting.
So right now we're in Pycharm, which is a
Yeah.
JetBrains product
Yes.
for Python devs. It's an IDE, right?
Yep.
What other IDEs are we supporting?
Sure. We're supporting the JetBrains family with Pycharm, IntelliJ IDEA, and WebStorm. And then we also have support for VS Code. And then our own IDEs, AWS Cloud9 and AWS Lambda Console.
I think the Lambda console should be interesting because
Yeah.
because people like to kind of try out small snippets of code in the console
Right.
all the time.
Yeah.
So this is built into the console, so it's like really handy.
That's actually pretty interesting,
Yep.
for sure.
And people interact with AWS services all the time in Lambda Console, right? Most
Yeah.
of the,
Yeah,
the,
we do.
the workflows, if you see, upload something to S3, push a notification to SNS, that's the type of code you would write. And that's where we will add, really like simple completions. We'll add value, we'll save time.
Yeah. I mean, this is super interesting, because one of the things I see that when you just did that is just for me, myself, I'm primarily a Go developer, so I spend a lot of time writing Go, but there are times when I have to write Python, right? And I feel
Yeah.
kind of out of my element.
Yeah.
And if I can just write
Exactly.
the comments, I mean, this could, save a lot of time for me.
Right.
Speaking of, what languages are we supporting today as well?
We support the most popular languages in Python, Java, and JavaScript.
Okay.
Wow. Excellent.
And we're always listening to customers, on what other languages we need to support in
Yeah.
near future.
We are in preview right now, so this is just our
This is-
time
yeah,
to
this is-
hear feedback from customers, and we're going to add more languages, more IDEs in the coming months.
Excellent. Excellent. This is awesome.
Very cool. Now, is this across, anything that's in the AWS SDK, essentially? Like, I know you showed us an S3 example. Are there, like I can generate code for calls to other services too from comments?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This should be across all the AWS services, and we are actually making conscious efforts in terms of the popular services and most used APIs. We are making sure not only it generates code, but it generates code the way it has generated now, right? It has the doc strings, it is explaining what it is doing, it has the error handling in there. So we will also make sure that we will adhere to the best practices while using that code.
Wow.
Is there like a reference too that I can find, like or is it really, I just write a comment with a description of what I'm trying to do, are there commands? Like, how do I learn to use this? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I think, as I said, like, there are two ways to do that, right? One is you could write a small natural language comment. Again, you can't say very vague things. You have to be a little bit more specific and short.
I'm a pretty vague person.
But the alternative is that you can just start writing your code. Because under the hood we use these large language models that are ultimately trying to figure out your intent based on kind of what you're trying to type. Then it'll recommend the next code just based on figuring out the context, your location of your cursor, all the code that has been written in your window. It'll generate the next snippet.
Oh yeah, it is like context aware too of all the rest of my project, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Like multiple files too across different files, classes, or is it mostly just the screen? And
For now, it's just the screen. Over time, we're going to look at that entire project. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. I think the other benefit about this is if you're writing in natural language in the comments, you have to put comments in your code.
Right.
You don't have this code without comments.
But now this time it's not painful, right? Because in the past, that is like extra work that I have to do. Well, actually, one interesting thing, speaking of developer pain points, right? We did not mention the fact that it can also generate a unit test for you. Now, I'm pretty sure.
Wait. You buried the lead. I don't ever want to write another unit test in my life.
So imagine you had a function before. All you do is test underscore the function name, and it will generate the unit test code for you.
That is awesome.
So that is going to save developers a lot of pain, and it's not the most fun thing to do.
It's
Super
not
interesting.
fun at all. Can we actually see it? I don't want to put you on the spot. It's okay if not. But
We could try that, but keep in mind, unit test for AWS services is a little different beast, right? You
right,
need to have,
you're calling to an API.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
hard to write a unit test for an API-based
yeah,
tool
we
anyway.
could
Super cool.
test underscore.
Wow,
and then
that's all you had to say. I was already sold, but now I'm
I know.
oversold.
You can literally write a natural language comment, and then my sprint's done.
All right. So what it is doing
Copy
is
and paste
basically it's trying to, if you look at the code,
I'll look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
so what it is trying to do is basically, trying to upload the file and see whether it returns true. Now, this is not the best of the unit test because, once again, you're calling an API, right? It's very difficult to actually go and see whether the file is uploaded. That's the right thing you would do. But if you had your own code that you had your own logic, it would actually, give you the first few assert statements, and then you can go from there.
That's great. Can I ask you, will it give me? I love the example you used, Brian. Like you're a Go programmer, but you have to write Python sometime.
Yeah.
Will it help me with like the Python standard library too? Is it mainly just focused on AWS services? Any thoughts around that? If not,
Take that.
Sure, yeah. And this is, we do want to help developers across all of their workflows, right? It's not only an AWS tool to actually make sure, So let's actually take a look at another example, which is very standard. Let's say we want to transform data, right? Which is like very common thing to do.
parse some JSON.
We'll parse the JSON, we'll convert it into CSV, and see how it goes. So once again, simple English.
All right.
Convert JSON.
But AM, basically, it is not meant only for AWS code development. It is very general purpose code development. Yeah,
I
it
love
is
it. I
used
thought
for
so.
yeah.
I just wanted to had to ask the question.
Right.
Yeah. See, now it is actually even guessing my intent based on my...
You don't even finish. Yeah.
Based on my import statements, it's guessing my intent. I'm going to hit tab, and say CSV file. Now it will generate the function signature for me. But let's say, I'm still not ready to accept the signature. I want to specify further instructions in the comment.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say keys of the JSON. Yeah, so now it's once again trying to complete my intent. So keys of the JSON file used as column names of the CSV file. I'll take this. Now I hit enter. Now it should generate the function signature. This time, I will accept it because I have provided enough instructions. And with hitting enter, now it should generate the entire function for me, right?
Wow.
And you can see it is giving me 3 alternatives to choose from. And that's where I think you had the question about who is in control.
Yeah.
I still have to look at the
have to
code.
verify it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you still have to know your programming.
You
basics,
do.
right?
Like,
It's not.
it's using a with statement, for example, right?
Yeah,
Instead
yeah.
of,
Right.
you know, like opening and closing the file in separate lines, right?
Right,
That's
exactly.
Python best practice.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And it's even throwing other comments in there. It's like
It's
open a
exact-
file for
yeah.
writing. Add a header.
So I like the third alternative the most. I'm going to accept that. And see, I think you mentioned you hit writing comments, so it is also writing the comments for you, right? It's
I know.
add the header, add the data, it's opening a file. It is generating the code along with the comments.
Yeah. Very neat.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, comments too. That's. I mean, my code doesn't need comments. It's I'm sure you heard that argument
Yeah,
before.
it's idiomatic. It's
Yeah, you
idiomatic.
just read the code. Like, it is the comment.
Yeah. Right.
I no, that's super helpful. You know, especially as your team grows. I don't know if you've ever had this. I'm sure you have. You join a team, their code is not commented.
Oh.
You have to dig through all the
Right,
spaghetti.
yep.
And it's fun. So
Yeah.
the fact that
Oh.
that's unit tests, comments. These are things that are extra effort that
Right.
that devs don't necessarily really want to spend a lot of time on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even your own code, because there's times when I write code and I go back 2 months later, it's like, how does this work? I didn't put comments.
Yeah,
So this is magical.
programmer I get the most angry with is the past version of myself. Absolutely.
It's like future Brian's going to hate me for this code.
This is incredible. I really, to your point, right?
Yeah.
You still have to know the language.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, you could trust blindly, I suppose, but it really does help to understand what is being
All right.
Yeah.
Recommend.
generated
Yes.
and
Yeah.
to check it, right?
Yeah.
Trust but verify, as
Right.
we say in the
Yeah,
security
absolutely.
field.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one thing we've just been talking about is like experienced developers using this, right? But what about people who are learning to code? I can see this as a powerful tool in someone learning to code for the first time using
Absolutely.
Python or
But
something.
particularly for things like AWS and other cloud kind of APIs, where the parameters and finding the exact API, I think that's a pain, you know. And I think let's pick an example of Stripe, for example. It has amazing APIs, everybody uses it. But as a newbie developer, I just don't want to kind of go and figure out the documentation. This basically understands my intent and basically helps me get the code, the starter code that is generally right, and I can then edit and tweak it.
Right.
That's very valuable, at least I think.
Yeah. Anything to call out about adding AI into the software development lifecycle? Anything there as gotchas people that should be aware of?
Sure, yeah, I can take this one. As in with all things AI, right, you have to make sure that you're using it responsibly. Now, we said that we have a large language model that has been trained on various types of code. Now, in that regard, the model actually gets more and more accurate with the size of the training data. So the more code you give it, it will actually be more accurate. But on the other hand, when we are using this publicly available code, not all of that is great code, right? So you have to make sure that when the code recommendations are generated, you're giving the developers the ability to do a couple of things. One, you can actually run security scans. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can actually see that for the code that is generated, as well as the user-written code, you can actually run security scan. And I have an example here where it gives you, if there is something wrong with your code, it gives you a quick notification that you should do something about it. Right? And this could be CodeWhisperer generated code or user-written code. But this is important to have because sometimes when you combine code that is written by someone else and generated by a tool, it can have issues. The other thing we have is the code reference tracker. Here, what happens is sometimes, even though I think Atul mentioned, it is writing code for you, right? It's not copy pasting for anywhere.
Right.
So as a human being would write a code after given an instruction, the model writes. But even then, sometimes it's very similar to code that could be found in training data. So the user should know in that scenario that, look, you should probably take a closer look at this. These lines of code, maybe look at the repository and the license type, and then decide whether you want to use it.
Responsibility is still yours, is what I hear from that. That's
But we make it easier for you to
Right,
detect.
we're giving you the
Yeah.
tools.
perfect. Yeah. 30 seconds left. Where do I get started with CodeWhisperer?
Sure, we are in a preview right now. You can join the wait list, go to the CodeWhisperer homepage. I don't have it memorized, do you write as the AWS at amazon.com/CodeWhisperer?
Correct, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
have
yeah.
it dropped in chat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And then
Thank you both. Like, this is an incredible launch. Probably one of my new favorite services, I'd
Thank
say.
you.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
We will be right back with more content with AWS On Air. Stick around.
Thanks.
Thank you.